Hello everyone, viewers. We all know the story Joshua, the Israelites, and the towering walls of Jericho. 7 priests, 7 trumpets, a great shout, and the walls came tumbling down. It's a Sunday school classic, a testament to the power of faith and obedience. But what if there's more to it? What if the story we've been told is just the surface layer, a simplified account of an event so strange, so technological? What if the trumpets weren't just for making noise, but were instruments of immense power, a form of ancient sonic weaponry whose secrets are lost to the dust of history? Today, we're not just retelling a story, we're peeling back the layers of myth to investigate one of the greatest military mysteries of the ancient world, the sonic weapon hidden in the trumpet's sound that brought down the impenetrable fortress of Jericho. 40 years of wandering in the desolate, unforgiving wilderness of Sinai, an entire generation had been born, lived, and died under a sun that baked the sand and a God who tested their souls. They were a people forged in hardship, their skin like leather, their eyes holding the distant gaze of those who have seen too much sand and too little promise. Their legendary leader, Moses, the man, he had led them to the very edge of their destiny, to the banks of the Jordan River, and from the top of Mount Nebo, he had seen the promised land, but he would not enter it. The mantle of leadership, heavy as a shroud and sharp as a sword, had fallen upon the shoulders of his successor, Joshua, son of Nun. Joshua was no stranger to command. He was a warrior, Moses' loyal lieutenant. He had seen the giants in the land and had not flinched. But now, standing at the head of a nation of nomads, the full weight of their future rested upon him. Across the churning waters of the Jordan lay their inheritance, a land said to be flowing with milk and honey. But it was not empty. It was a land of fortified cities, of fierce tribes, of iron chariots, and of kings who would not give up their thrones without a fight. And blocking their path like a stone sentinel, a monument to pagan power, stood the first and greatest obstacle, the city of Jericho. Jericho wasn't just a city, it was a legend. It was one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on earth, a bastion of Canaanite strength. Its name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Mesopotamia, and its strength came from its not one wall but 2. A massive outer retaining wall of stone, some 15 feet high, upon which sat a second, inner wall of mud brick, soaring another 20 to 25 feet into the sky. Atop this, wooden ramparts where archers could stand, protected and untouchable. The city was a fortress within a fortress, designed to break the heart of any army that dared to approach. To the weary Israelites, the task of conquering it was not just daunting, it was impossible. Their 40 years of wandering had not equipped them with siege engines, with catapults or battering rams. They were a nation on the move, an army of infantry hardened by the desert but ill-equipped for conventional warfare against such a formidable opponent. Doubt, a venomous serpent, began to coil in the hearts of the people. They had seen miracles. Moses was dead. God felt distant. And Jericho stood before them, solid, real, and utterly terrifying. Whispers spread through the camp like a sandstorm. Can Joshua do this? Is he another Moses? Or has he led us here to die at the foot of these cursed walls? Joshua felt their fear. He felt his own. In the quiet of his tent, the commander of the armies of Israel was just a man. And then the voice of God came to him, not in a thunderclap or a whirlwind, but in the stillness of his heart. The instructions he received were unlike any military command ever given. There was no talk of siege towers or scaling ladders, no plan for undermining the walls or starving the city out. The plan was, by any human standard, insane. You shall march around the city, all the men of war, going around on the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. Joshua must have felt a chill run down his spine, marching trumpets, shouting. This wasn't a battle plan. It was a religious procession. He was to take his army and parade them like festival, goers before an enemy that was armed to the teeth and laughing at them from behind impenetrable walls. To follow these orders would be to risk not only defeat, but utter ridicule. It was a test of faith so profound it bordered on madness. But Joshua's faith had been forged in the same desert that had hardened his people. He had seen the power of God, and he understood that God's ways were not man's ways. His battle was not just against the stone and brick of Jericho, but against the fear and doubt within his own camp before he could command his army. However, he needed intelligence. A frontal assault was suicide, and even God's plan required groundwork. He summoned two of his most trusted men, men whose names are lost to history, but whose courage is not. Their mission to infiltrate Jericho. If they were caught, they would face a gruesome death, and the city would be alerted to the Israelites' presence and intentions. The two spies crossed the Jordan under the cover of darkness, swimming the swift current, and slipped through the shadows of the outlying fields. They approached the great city, its walls blotting out the stars. Getting in was the first challenge. The city gates were sealed at nightfall. They found a place where a merchant's rope had been left dangling. A moment of carelessness, and they scaled the outer wall. Now they were inside the belly of the beast. Jericho at night was a labyrinth of narrow streets, smelling of wood smoke, livestock, and unwashed bodies. Torches cast flickering, monstrous shadows. The spies moved silently, their desert-honed senses on high alert. Their goal was an inn, a place where travelers and locals mingled, a place where tongues were loosened by wine and secrets could be overheard. They found such a place built directly into the city wall itself. It was run by a woman whose name would become legendary, Rahab. Rahab was a prostitute. In the society of Jericho, she was an outcast, living on the margins, both literally and figuratively. Her home built into... When the two Israelite spies entered her establishment, she knew immediately they were not from Jericho. Their clothes, their accents, the way they carried themselves, they were outsiders, but she didn't raise the alarm. Instead, she offered them lodging. Why? Was it just business? Or did she sense something more? The king of Jericho's intelligence network was good. Word of two strangers asking questions had reached the path. The moment of truth had arrived. Rahab's life and the spies' lives hung in the balance. With a calm that defied the terror of the situation, she faced the soldiers. She had already hidden the men on her roof, burying them under stalks of flax that were drying in the sun. "True," she said, her voice steady. "The men came to me, but I did not know where they were from, and when the gate was about to be closed, it was a masterful deception." The soldiers, believing her, thundered out of the inn and charged out of the city gates in pursuit of a phantom enemy. The gates of Jericho were sealed behind them. The spies were safe. For now, Rahab went up to the roof. The two men emerged from the flax, shaken but alive. They owed her their lives. But what she said, it was a calculated act of treason, an earth-shattering declaration of faith. "I know that the Lord has given you the land," she whispered, her voice urgent in the night air, "and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath." This was the intelligence Joshua needed. It wasn't about the number of soldiers or the thickness of the walls. It was about their walls seemed less like a shield and more like a cage. Rahab told the spies more. She spoke of the city's arrogance, the king's paranoia, but she may have shared something else, a piece of local lore, a secret known only to those who lived in the shadow of the walls. Perhaps she spoke of the construction of the walls themselves, of a flaw, a prophecy, a story passed down through generations about a sound that could shatter stone. "Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that, as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign." The spies agreed. They made a solemn oath. "Our life for yours," they promised. They told her to gather her entire family into her house and to tie a scarlet cord in her window. That cord would be the sign. When the Israelites came, everything and everyone outside that house would be destroyed. She was literally letting them out through the very structure they had come to destroy. "Go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you. Hide there for 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then you may go your way." The spies escaped into the night. their minds reeling. They had found more than they had bargained for. They had found an ally, a weakness, and a confirmation that the terror of God had already... It was the spring, and the river was at flood stage, a raging torrent. To cross it seemed impossible. But Joshua, acting on God's command, ordered the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to step into the water. The moment their feet touched the river's edge, the waters upstream miraculously piled up in a heap, and the riverbed became dry ground. The entire nation of Israel walked across on the bottom of the Jordan River to the Israelites. It was a sign that God's power was with Joshua just as it had been with Moses. To the Canaanite kings, including the king of Jericho, it was an act of terrifying, incomprehensible power. The news spread like fire, and the hearts of Israel's enemies melted like wax. The spies returned to the camp at Gilgal, their report electrifying. Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Joshua now had everything he needed, a divine strategy, crucial intelligence, and a people whose faith had been renewed by the miracle at the Jordan. The stage was set. The confrontation with Jericho was inevitable. The army of Israel, a nation of former slaves, stood ready to face the greatest fortress in the land, armed not with swords and spears, but with a bizarre, almost laughable set. The sun rose over the plains, casting a long shadow from the colossal walls of Jericho. Inside the city, the people woke to an uneasy silence. They had heard of the river crossing. The bravado of the soldiers on the walls was a thin veneer over a growing dread. Then they saw it. The army of Israel was on the move. But they weren't forming battle lines. They weren't preparing rams or ladders. Behind them came 7 priests, their faces solemn, each carrying a shofar, a trumpet made from a ram's horn. Behind the priests came the most sacred object in all of Israel, the Ark of the Covenant, a golden box overlaid with gold, carried on poles by other priests. It was the symbol of God's presence with his people, and behind the Ark, the main body of the Israelite army marched, a river of men. The defenders on the walls watched in stunned disbelief. What was this? Some kind of religious ritual, a psychological trick. It was absurd. Jeers and insults rained down from the ramparts. "Look at the desert rats," a captain shouted. "They think they can pray our walls down." Laughter echoed among the soldiers, but one thing was deeply unsettling. The Israelites were completely silent. There were no war. The only sounds were the tramp of thousands of feet on the dusty ground and the eerie, mournful cry of the 7 shofars. The sound of the trumpets was not a triumphant blast, but a long, resonant note that seemed to hang in the air, a strange vibration that seemed to penetrate the very stones of the wall. After one full circle, the procession stopped, turned, and marched back to their camp. And that was it. "It is a fool's parade," his top general scoffed. "They are trying to intimidate us with their desert god and their strange rituals. Let them march. It will tire them out. We have enough food and water to last for years." A priest of Baal, however, was less certain. "There is power in ritual, my king. Their silence is unnatural, and the sound of those horns, it sets my teeth on edge." The king dismissed his... "Strengthen the watch, but do not be afraid. Our walls have stood for 1,000 years, they will stand for 1,000 more." Day 2 was the same. The silent procession, the tramp of feet, the unsettling drone of the 7 shofars, the single, slow circuit around the city. On the walls of Jericho, the laughter was a little less confident. The insults were fewer. The strangeness of the ritual was beginning to wear. The sheer, disciplined patience of it was unnerving. By day 3, the mockery had stopped completely. A tense silence fell over the city as the procession began. The people of Jericho watched from the walls and rooftops, their faces a mixture of fear and fascination. Why were they doing this? What did it mean? The relentless repetition was a form of psychological torture. The daily appearance of the sound of the shofars was becoming a familiar, dreaded part of their day. It was a sound that promised something, but what? Day 4, a stonemason working to repair a section of the inner wall noticed something odd. As the Israelites marched below, he felt a faint vibration through the soles of his sandals. It was almost imperceptible, like the hum of a giant beehive deep within the earth. He placed his hand on the wall. "It is just the wind." But the mason knew it wasn't the wind. Later that day, he saw a fine trickle of dust run from a crack between two massive stones. It was nothing, really, but he had never seen it happen before. The walls of Jericho were settling. Inside the king's palace, the council was in turmoil. "We must attack," the general urged. "We cannot let them continue this siege of the mind. We can break their to interrupt their ritual might be to unleash a power we do not understand. We must see what they intend." The king was paralyzed by indecision. His city was being besieged not by an army, but by an idea. His soldiers were becoming restless. Sleep was difficult. The silence from the Israelite camp at night was as terrifying as the marching during the day. What were they planning? The citizens of Jericho no longer came to the walls to watch. They stayed in their homes, trying to block out the sound. The hum in the walls was more noticeable now. People started to report that pottery on shelves would gently rattle as the army passed. A hairline crack appeared in the plaster of the king's throne room. Panic began to take root. The city, once a symbol of impenetrable strength, was starting to feel like a trap. By now, a sense of doom had descended upon Jericho. The Israelites marched their single circuit, their faces like stone masks. The sound of the shofars seemed to hang heavier in the air, thick with unspoken threat. They completed their circle and returned to their camp. The sun set on Jericho, an oppressive quiet fell. Everyone in the city knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that tomorrow. They waited, listening to the silence, which was now more terrifying than any noise. In the Israelite camp, Joshua gathered his commanders. The final instructions were given. "Tomorrow we circle the city not once, but 7 times. On the 7th time, when the priests blow a long blast on the shofars, I will give the command, and every man, every woman, every child who can make a sound will shout." Not with. If you've been captivated by this deep dive into the strategy and suspense behind this biblical epic, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to uncover more of these incredible hidden stories. Now, back to the final fateful day. The 7th day dawned before the sun had even crested the horizon. The Israelite camp was stirring. There was a new energy in the air. As the first rays of light struck the towering walls of Jericho, the procession began. Once again, the silent march. Once again, the eerie sound of the 7 trumpets. They completed the first circuit, but this time they did not return to camp. They began a second. Inside Jericho, the watchers on the walls felt a surge of adrenaline and terror. This was it. The pattern was broken. The Israelites, fueled by anticipation, did not falter. The people of Jericho watched, their knuckles white, their breath held tight in their chests. 5 circuits, 6. With each pass, the hum in the walls grew stronger. The dust trickled from the cracks in a steady stream now. The very foundations of the city seemed to groan in protest. The sound of the shofars, blown continuously for hours. The priests were not just blowing into horns. They were skilled musicians, masters of their instrument. Perhaps they were modulating the frequency, searching for a pitch, a specific resonance that matched the natural frequency of the stone and brick. For 6 days they had been tuning the walls, introducing a vibration, a stress that was invisible but relentless. Today, they were amplifying it to its. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with energy like the air before a lightning strike. Joshua moved to the front, his eyes fixed on the walls. In her house on the wall, Rahab gathered her family, her heart pounding. The scarlet cord in her window was a fragile prayer in the face of the coming storm. The procession completed its 7th and final lap around the doomed city. They came to a halt. A profound silence fell. The entire world. He looked at his people, at the priests, at the Ark of the Covenant, and then at the walls that had mocked them for 6 days. He took a deep breath. His hand chopped down. A single, coordinated, impossibly long and powerful blast erupted from the 7 shofars. It was a sound unlike any ever heard on earth. It was not a musical note. It was a spear of sound, a focused wave of concussive force. Then Joshua opened his mouth and roared, "Shout!" And the people shouted. It was the pent-up cry of a nation, the cry of 40 years in the desert, the cry of slaves finding their freedom, the cry of faith unleashed. It was the voices of hundreds of thousands of people, all focused into a single explosive moment. The shout joined the blast of the trumpets, and the two forces merged. The hum in the wall, the stones which had been vibrating at their resonant frequency, lost their structural integrity. They didn't just break apart, they lost cohesion. The mortar turned to dust. The massive blocks of stone seemed to liquefy, to lose their very nature as solid objects. With a groan that sounded like the earth itself was being torn apart, the great walls of Jericho, the pride of Canaan, the scripture says they fell down flat. They disintegrated, collapsing into a massive ramp of rubble. The city's greatest defense had become its ramp of execution. There was no longer a wall to climb, only a slope of broken stone leading directly into the heart of the city. The Israelite army, which had been standing in silent readiness, let out a true battle cry and surged forward. Every man charged straight. The defenders, who had been paralyzed with terror by the collapse of their walls, were in no condition to fight. They were psychologically shattered before the first sword was even drawn. The Israelites poured into the city, a tide of divine judgment. As the battle raged, the two spies whom Rahab had saved made their way through the chaos, searching for a window with a scarlet cord. They found it, and as promised, the city was utterly destroyed, burned with fire, just as God had commanded. It was to be a sign, a stark warning to all the other Canaanite kingdoms. But the legacy of Jericho is not just in its destruction, but in the mystery of how it happened. Was it simply a miracle, a direct intervention by God who suspended the laws of physics for a moment? Absolutely. That is the foundation. Is it possible that the miracle was not in the suspension of natural law, but in the divine revelation of it? That God gave Joshua not a magic trick, but a blueprint for a weapon that was millennia ahead of its time? Think of it. The concept of resonant frequency is a cornerstone of modern physics. Every object has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. If you apply a force to that object at its resonant frequency, it is how a trained singer can shatter a crystal glass with their voice. It is the principle behind certain advanced, non-lethal weapons being developed today. Now imagine that principle applied on a massive scale. The 7 shofars, perhaps each tuned to a slightly different frequency, probing the walls for their point of failure. The 6 days of marching, a slow, steady application of acoustic energy, building up stress in the structure. The story of Jericho's fall becomes a masterclass in psychological warfare and advanced acoustic engineering, all wrapped within a divine command. It teaches us that the greatest weapons are not always forged in fire and steel. Sometimes they are forged in faith, discipline, and a sound that can shatter stone. The fall of Jericho was the key that unlocked the promised land for the Israelites. It was a victory so spectacular, so impossible, that it sent a shockwave of fear through the land of Canaan, paving the way for their subsequent conquests. And at the center of it all is Joshua, the leader who dared to obey a command that seemed like madness, and the incredible, awe-inspiring power of a sound that brought a city to its knees. All right, that is all for today's video. We've journeyed from the sands of the wilderness. If you liked this video and our exploration into the hidden layers of these timeless stories, please subscribe to the channel and give it a like to support us. It truly helps us create more content like this. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.